The Pennsylvanian pilot's plot. It was around 1:30 in the afternoon. My friends and I were scheduled to meet at Chad's house around 3:30. I got together everything I would need for the trip, the backpacking trip that was, and relaxed a bit before hopping back in my car and going to Chad's. 10 minutes later, and I was there. Colin, Steve, Frank were already outside waiting for me in the driveway, and Chad claimed he'd meet us outside in a minute.
"What's good, gang?"
said Steve. "Hey yo, what's up? Do you and Frank have everything you need for the weekend?"
"Fuck around we do, fam. We going into the Deaf Man's Wilderness today. I brought everything that you can need."
"Like?" Colin said.
"I brought my speaker, my Swiss Army knife, my blanket, my BB gun, and my bag of Takis."
Steve wore a gray sleeveless shirt with baggy army green sweatpants. He wore a clean new pair of LeBrons on his feet. "You aren't prepared enough, Steve. You need more than that. We're going into the wilderness for the whole weekend," Colin remarked.
"I don't give a shit. I'm the tough boy in this hood. Everyone know that."
"Steve, we're in the Holly Hills neighborhood. We're going into a different kind of hood this weekend."
"Again, G, I got my strap. Them odds don't stand a chance."
I knew that Steve knew we were going into the wilderness, but something also told me that he didn't quite get the picture of what we're actually doing, which involved hiking through the woods all day and camping at a different location both nights. Whatever. "Steve, just don't be dumb." I had to agree with Colin. Where we were going wasn't too treacherous, and besides, it was late May and it'd be warm, sunny, and with no rain scheduled. Anyway, how about you, Frank? What are you bringing?
"I'm bringing my huge Jimbo's captures, as big as marshmallows. He's my spotlight,"
Frank replied. He wore a fishing t-shirt with long basketball shorts. The fishing t-shirt he had was a plain and simple design, and on it said, "I'm a master baiter," the fishing context. And this shirt, it was not enough to hide his potbelly. "Good thing you didn't wear that shirt to school, Frank," I told him.
"Yeah, I did. My teacher said I had to go to the principal's office, but luckily, I didn't."
Frank's even more unprepared. This is no surprise. Everyone already knew that Frank was always the least prepared person for any situation, not just backpacking. "Guys, it's fine. Again, the weather's gonna be good. Chad's coming out now, so we should probably get going," I said. Chad just then exited his house, backpack in hand.
"Let's get it. Chad is finally ready."
"Sure I am, bro. I think we can all agree that a nice bro packing trip is exactly what we all need to unwind after a long week at school."
Out of Steve and Frank, Chad actually looked prepared. He wore his typical football Letterman jacket with jeans, though his backpack was huge, had all sorts of items on the sides of it and such. He even brought a portable miniature fan.
Ooh. I need a hand, bros,"
Chad said as his backpack forced into the ground due to its weight. "Chad, it appears you may have packed a bit too heavy. Let's do a gear shakedown for you," said Colin.
One sec, bro. Let me drop a few items that I won't be needing,"
Chad replied, sounding worried. Beads of sweat formed in his forehead as soon as Colin suggested that we shake out his pack. Chad ran back into his garage and faced away from us as he dove into his bag, literally. We then heard the sounds of cellophane crinkling and being stuffed into a random dry sack. He then took out a Sharpie and wrote on it the words, "Confidential." "It's in that bag, Chad?" I asked out of curiosity.
"Just my meds, bro. That's all. Just my meds,"
Chad replied, still nervous. "Alright then, let's see what you'll be bringing this weekend." Chad allowed us to go through his backpack, though he brought way too many items. I don't need to list each and every one of the items, that would get redundant very quickly. But let's just say, some of these items involved a 1-gallon container of Old Spice hair gel, the portable fan like I already mentioned, desserts, 5 pairs of jeans, extra shoes, and 10 of his football Letterman jackets. But yeah, with the help of Colin and I, we were able to reduce the weight of Chad's backpack from 65 pounds to 25 pounds.
"I don't know about this one, bro. I'm not much of a minimalist."
It was funny because the items we allowed Chad to keep were way more than minimalist. We even allowed him to keep the portable fan. "Alright, enough lollygagging," I said. "Let's get going." And so we did just that. We all hopped in the car and hit the road. I was driving, and Colin sat in the passenger seat. The rest took residency in the back. However, before we got out of town onto the highway, Steve claimed he needed to stop at the airport. "Why the fuck do you need to stop there of all places?" I asked him.
"Man, I gotta pick up delivery. It's my neck pads."
"Why are you having it delivered to the airport? You don't even live in this town anymore."
"'Cause I can't be having my dad see it. He gonna be pissed."
It was weird how Steve had it delivered to the airport of all places, as he simply could have just had it delivered to a neighbor's house or something. I pulled over and stopped there nonetheless though. Steve led us outside the car and across the runway until we reached a random building made of white tin. It was like one of those portables you find in some schools. Steve led us inside and into a small hallway. It seemed as if the entire portable was soundproof or whatnot, as our voices didn't echo, not one bit. Steve picked up his package and was about to lead us outside. We froze for a moment though when we heard commotion going on inside one of of the rooms down the hall to the right. Wonder what's going on. I have no clue, I replied. We had no time to investigate further, though, because all of a sudden, a plump figure wearing a white suit came running out of the room. They ran right into us, causing Steve to fall to the ground.
Yo, man, watch it!
The figure climbed up from the ground and faced us. It was no one other than Herbert Ernie himself.
Check it out, boys. I just get my pilot's license.
He held a piece of paper in his chubby, pale hand. Upon closer inspection, I saw that it was a certificate. It was one that one would receive upon graduation from pilot school. "Oh, no, you did not!" a man yelled as he chased Herbert out of the portable. "Get back here with that! You're not allowed to have it!" he shouted furiously. But it was too late. Herbert ran out of the portable and sped away in his blue minivan. What the fuck was that all about? I said, shocked. "I think that Herbert stole a pilot's license from the airport," replied Colin.
No shit, G. But let's figure his ass. Let's do it.
Steve was right. We had to forget about Herbert and what he was doing. We had time to make, and besides, there's no point in worrying about Herbert following us. He had already sped off and also had no idea where we were going, and so we all hopped back in the car and resumed driving. I got us onto the highway and onto some backcountry roads. Pretty soon, we were deep into the Pennsylvania wilderness. We were driving along a highway following a river when we got into a small town. Chad was getting hungry, as was Frank. The rest of us needed to use the bathroom, and since it was close to 6 in the evening at this point, we figured getting food for dinner would be a wise idea while we're at it. I parked the car and we all walked inside. After using the bathroom, Colin and I each got some Monster Energies. Steve went and ordered himself a double bacon cheeseburger with wings. Chad went to make himself a protein shake, but also ordering himself some chili dogs. And finally, Frank got a jumbo-sized bag of nacho cheese popcorn, which stank up the car greatly and made a huge mess on the floor as well. "Oh, Frank, you really gotta put some thought into your food choices and whether or not it's a wise decision," I said.
Well, I'm just trying to make sure I have enough energy for the trip.
I agree with Nick. Frank may benefit from choosing his grub options more like me and having the gains mindset.
Chad said as he sipped his protein shake, quote unquote. Chad, your protein shake is literally just a regular ass milkshake with ice cream and mint chocolate chips.
Well, bros, ice cream is dairy, and dairy has protein.
We continued driving. About an hour later, and it was almost around 7. Luckily for us, the sun set late this time of year. We were cruising along a chill road through the mountains. We rounded the corner of a hill, however, and were brought literally bumper to bumper with a blue minivan.
This motherfucker's about to get his ass in a high gear, G. He be slow as a bitch.
Colin and I knew it was really up, however. The driver of the minivan caught sight of us in his rearview mirror and pulled over to the shoulder of the road. I had no clue why we did, but we too pulled over right behind it. The driver then stepped out to greet us. It was no one other than Herbert Ernie himself. "Herbert, what are you doing here?"
Hello, boys. I'm glad you pulled over to say hello. I was just on my way to the airport to fly my first airplane. My name is Flyboy Ernie, and it is my sole honor and duty to keep patrol on the skies from above. And it seems like you boys are acting extra mischievous this weekend. Therefore, I will be tagging along with you boys immediately.
"No, Herbert. Putting up with you and your shenanigans this weekend is not a part of our itinerary. Leave now."
Don't worry, Nick. I only need a ride to the airport. There, I will be rewarded with my very first airplane as a treat for getting my pilot's license.
Herbert, you never got your pilot's license. Stop bullshitting, and don't mess with any planes.
Then I guess I'll have to hike with you boys in the ground then. But either way, I must keep my eyes glued onto you boys.
"Oh, no," said Colin. "You know, on second thought, just go to the airport, Herbert, but don't bother us." Colin made a smart move by simply just letting Herbert go to the airport instead of coming with us, because at least now he'd be out of her hair. Herbert then gave us a salute and hopped back into his minivan, presumably heading towards the airport,
Nice on Potato Man.
mentioned Steve.
Ernie ass be heading all the way to the fucking airport. They'll be in Pittsburgh.
Though little did we know that there was a small local airport / pilot training center just outside of the Kuhana area, only 3 miles from the trailhead. And for context, the Kuhana area was the area in which we'd be backpacking in that weekend. We continued driving for about another hour. Before we knew it, we entered Moshannon State Forest, in which the Kuhana Wild Area was located. 30 minutes later, and it was around 8:20 in the evening. The sun was in the process of setting, and dusk set over the landscape as we pulled into the trailhead parking lot. There were only a few other cars there, but it appeared that they were only car campers, camping at the nearby lake. As far as backpacking in the actual wilderness, we'd be the only humans around. On the ground, at least. We stepped out of the car and took in the crisp, fresh air. Even the trailhead was scenic, surrounded by meadows and spruce trees.
Seems like a cozy spot to make base camp,
Stated Chad.
I'll hold down the fort for the weekend while you bros go hiking.
Chad said as he began to set up his camp chair and portable fan right in the middle of the parking lot. Base camp, I replied, confused. Chad, we're going backpacking where, in case you forgot, we go hiking all day and camp at a different location each night. There is no base camp.
No base camp?
Gulped Chad, sounding quite worried. Nope, Colin affirmed.
Well then, I may as well find it best to chill at the site of the whip while you bros go on your wilderness expedition.
Fuck nah, you pussy. You come out here with the rest of us. We go hardcore mode in this joint.
But it was too late. Chad had already claimed residency in his camp chair, the portable fan blowing on him, full power. He then lit one of those citronella tea light candles as a means of keeping those pesky mosquitoes away.
I'm gonna chill here and soak in the beauty of nature.
Guys, just let him be. It's getting dark and we have about a mile hike into camp tonight. Let's get going. We did just that. Colin and I were a little unsure about leaving Chad on his own at the car, but we figured that he was a responsible young man and could fend for himself. Besides, we didn't have time to argue with him anyway, and so we got hiking. It was funny how Colin and I were the only ones with actual backpacking backpacks. Steve had a tiny drawstring bag, and Frank had his classic black contractor bag, along with his 2 jumbo-sized camp chairs slung over his shoulders. The trail for the time being went along the side of a short hill with a swamp/creek down the hill to our right. The green vibrancy of the late spring leaves was stunning to the eye. Before we knew it, we were at camp, and by that time it was almost all the way dark out. Colin and I set up our hammocks and tents before getting a campfire going to chill around. Steve sat on a log and quietly listened to some music on his phone, and Frank wandered off into the woods without a flashlight to go and grab some more firewood, as he claimed. It was a tad suspicious, however, as he said that statement with a tiny hint of he was up to something. He went far into the woods too. It was pretty much dark out now, so we couldn't even see him anymore. Steve, Colin, and I sat around the campfire and simply hung out for the evening. We had completely forgotten about Frank, until I kid you not, 1 hour later, we witnessed the faint silhouette of a chubby figure with a wide arm stretch.
Ray, would it be, G?
Steve inquired, sounding slightly scared. The black figure continued approaching our campsite. They waddled side to side as they walked, like a penguin. They soon were illuminated by the firelight, and their identity was revealed. It was Frank, back with the firewood. Except it wasn't firewood. Frank, I thought you were going to get firewood, Con exclaimed.
It was!
Rather than firewood in the traditional sense, Frank had gathered up a heaping pile of pine needles. He had gathered so much that his pile was like the size of a dresser. I don't know how the pine needles didn't fall apart. It was almost as if they were held together with some sort of invisible glue. Frank, you are not putting that in the fire.
I'm not! I'm just making the campfire go better!
Frank then proceeded to dump the entire pile of the needles onto the fire. We all jumped back from the firing as the flames grew 3 times as bright and reached more than 7 feet in the air. Frank, what the fuck? I exclaimed.
Man, your buzz ass always be ruining the trip.
Whee! Dancing flames!
Exclaimed Frank as he laughed frantically. Soon the flames got so out of control that leaves around the fire ring caught on fire as well. And so we had to act fast. Colin and I grabbed our water bottles and emptied all the water we had to help control the fire. Luckily it worked, and the fire was brought back down to a manageable size. Luckily, we were camping right by a creek, and so we could easily get more water. Frank, from now on, don't do anything without first consulting us, I told him.
You kidding you? We just trying to have fun.
We all sat around the fire for another half hour as the crickets of the night set in. We then began receiving a FaceTime call. It was from Chad. He was still sitting in his camp chair, but now had a bug net on. I could tell the mosquitoes were bad where he was, as we could hear them buzzing through the phone. The only reason they weren't bad where we were was because we had a campfire to ward them off. Chad also held a ping pong paddle with a ball attached to it via an elastic string to also ward off bugs, along with a lantern hanging from his head on the bug net, and he wondered why the bugs swarmed him. He kind of looked like Mr. Krabs from that one SpongeBob episode, where SpongeBob and Patrick become invisible and pretended to be ghosts. Chad then said some words to us, and here is our exact conversation.
Native bitch.
Hey, what's up?
Oh, the bugs are pretty bad out here, bros. It's also getting real spooky.
Hey, that sounds like something only Buzzman would say. We out here in the deep woods and you don't see us, bitchin'.
Do you mind, Nick, if you could unlock your car so I can hop inside for the night?
Chad, what makes you think my car keys can reach over a mile away to unlock it?
Come on, please, bro. Getting real creeped out here, and I want to keep the future of the game secure. I'll only be in the car to wait out the night, though.
Chad, you are not getting the point. I can't unlock the car from this far away, and I am not hiking back in the middle of the night just so your chicken little looking ass can get out of the scary, buggy dark.
Hey, this man really said chicken little looking ass.
Oh, okay, bro. Good night, then. I'll see you bros in the morning. hopefully.
Part of me did kind of feel bad for Chad, who was all alone out there in the dark. But hey, it was his decision to not come with us. We gave him his chance. We chilled around the fire for some more time before calling it a night. It was around 10 p.m. now, and we were all getting pretty tired, except for Steve. Frank was already out cold in his jumbo-sized camp chairs.
Man, I'm finna stay up all night long.
Steve announced. Hey, have fun with that. You're just gonna be alone in the dark all night, just like Chad. Then, you're gonna wake up in the morning feeling like ass.
Nah, fam, I'm tough. Besides, I got my bean chili to keep my eyes awake.
Replied Steve as he pulled out a nasty-looking can of beans. Steve then went and curled up in a ball on his shoulder. He took out his phone and began watching some shows on Netflix. Colin crawled inside his tent, and I retreated inside my hammock. I was quite tired from the day's activities, so I fell asleep almost instantly. I woke up at some random hour in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps crunching in the leaves outside my hammock. It was a full moon that night, so I could actually see somewhat my surroundings. I peeked outside my hammock tarp and saw the chubby figure of Frank, wide awake, slouched over in his jumbo-sized camp chairs, munching on a bag of cheese puffs. And I thought nothing of it, and so I went back to sleep. I woke up peacefully in the morning to the pre-dawn light of the woods. The birds are already out and chirping. I got out my sleeping bag and took down my hammock before heading on over to the campsite to where the others were, as I had set my hammock up off in the woods just a little bit. Everyone else was still asleep, except for Colin, who, like me, had just woken up and was in the process of taking down his tent. Frank was out cold still on his jumbo-sized camp chairs, exactly where he fell asleep around the campfire last night. And Steve was curled up in a ball, not on the boulders as he claimed like he was going to be, but rather on the leafy ground. He's barely asleep though, and covered in leafy morning dew. Steve, it's time to get moving.
Oh, man, my head hurts like a beach cheese.
Probably from sleeping on the hard ground all night.
Nah, fam, one of my boys hooked me up with some perkies yesterday during school. That shit be giving me huge-ass hangovers.
Steve looked miserable. He was all cold, wet, and miserable from sleeping on the ground without a sleeping bag or pad, let alone a pillow. His sleeveless shirt did not do any good at keeping him insulated. Frank! I shouted. Time to wake up. We have to get hiking. Got a lot of miles to cover today. But Frank didn't budge. He was steady snoring, reclined all the way back in his jumbo-sized camp chairs. Yes, that includes both of them. I had no idea how in the world he was able to sit in 2 chairs at once. But somehow, he did.
I know how to wake Buzzman up.
Steve then reached into Frank's black contractor bag and pulled out an unopened bag of cheese puffs. This made no sense though, as he was munching on that very same bag last night. Steve opened the bag and dumped it all over Frank.
Cheese.
He then started hastily eating them, waking up promptly after.
Seems like I get breakfast in bed.
Cackled Frank as he continued eating the rest of the cheese puffs. That reminded the rest of us. Breakfast. We needed to get cooking soon so we could get hiking soon. Colin and I both got out our mini stoves. I would make some chocolate oatmeal and Colin would have some scrambled eggs. He was not too happy about it. Frank obviously was eating cheese puffs for breakfast, but Steve, on the other hand, had other plans.
Man, I'm finna get some high mountain trout for some breakfast grub.
Proclaimed Steve, referring to the creek just near our campsite. Hey, have fun with that. Steve disappeared into the grove of thick pine trees where the creek was. Colin and I ate our breakfast and simply chatted with Frank. The day was going to be beautiful. The sun was just beginning to rise and there wasn't a single cloud in the sky on the cool, clear morning. As we ate our food, we heard the faint sound of a bush plane flying high overhead. It was pretty high and far off, and so we thought nothing of it. Huge mistake. Wonder if Chad survived the night, asked Colin. I'm sure he's fine, though I am a little worried for his well-being. We saw him on FaceTime last night. He was petrified. Yeah, no time to worry about him though. We need to focus on eating so we can get hiking. Colin was right. However, we wouldn't be going anywhere until Steve caught his mountain trout. Just then, Steve reemerged from the pine trees. Except he didn't have a trout, or any fish at all for that matter. Whatever he had, he kept it in a small tin can from his beans last night. Did you find your trout, Steve?
Nah, man, fuck them trout. I found something 10 times better. Crawfish.
Sure enough. When I peeked inside the tin can, there were about 3 small crawfish squirming around inside.
With these crawfish, I'm for make a record time on the hike today. Who knows? Maybe at camp this afternoon, I'll take a few grizzly bears out for a joyride or two. Just like the tough man.
Hey, those don't look very palatable, Colin mentioned.
Man, you just a bitch, that's all. Back when I lived in the hood, I'd be eating this shit daily.
Steve then took the crawfish and popped one in his mouth. He spit it out the very next instant.
That'd be nasty as fuck, G. That bullshit be tasted so bad. Tastes like Busman's ball sack.
He then ran pine needles on his tongue to try and get the taste out. It wasn't enough, however, as he had to steal some of Frank's cheese balls to get the taste out further.
Man, give me those.
Yee! There's your main cheese balls.
Sorry, Buzzman. These puffs be for grizzly bear riding motherfuckers
Frank then began to get teary-eyed and cry as a result of Steve stealing his cheese balls. I had to think fast. I reached into my bag and handed Frank a chocolate bunny I had left over from Easter. It seemed to do the trick. Steve went and tossed his crawfish back into the woods. Colin and I continued to work on finishing eating ourselves. We heard the very same bush plane fly overhead once more, though this time way closer. It disappeared and not even a minute later flew over again. Then again. It flew directly over our exact location also. What could be going on? I wondered. The plane flew over us once more, though this time Colin felt a tiny object land on his neck. Hey, what is it? Let's see, replied Colin. We looked to the ground where it fell, and were shocked to see the crumb of a sour cream and onion potato chip, courtesy of Frank coming over to taste it. We knew for a fact that the crumb came from the plane. Just then, the exact same bush plane flew overhead of us. By this point, it was only hovering a few feet above the tree canopy. About 52 more chip crumbs fell from the sky. We then came to the conclusion that whoever the pilot was must have been munching on some chips and was spilling them overboard. The plane then flew over us again before doing something I did not think was possible. It began hovering in place, just floating in the air above our campsite, engine still running and everything. The plane was so close to us at this point that I thought we could practically see into the cockpit. I then caught a glimpse of a mysterious figure surveying the trees with binoculars. As soon as they caught sight of us, they scrambled and took action. I wonder who could be doing this, Colin asked.
Man, probably just some dumbass, goofy motherfucker who just got their pilot license and be dicking around.
Steve is confirmed wrong, however, when the pilot began flying the bush plane away from us. We were all relieved. Our relief was short-lived, though, when the plane began slowly flying back our direction. Colin and I, deep down, knew it was about to happen. Everyone get out of the way! Colin shouted. We all did just that. The plane began grazing the tree canopy of the forest before doing a bunch of somersault motions as it crashed right in front of our very eyes. The plane was totaled and just sat there, smoke rising from it. We were all beyond speechless, as never in our lives did we think we'd witness a plane crash, on a backpacking trip of all occasions. The pilot slowly made their way out of the now wrecked cockpit and stood up to face us. It was no one other than Herbert Ernie himself.
Oops. Wait, hey. Seems like Flyboy Ernie rushed through his pilot training and fly too fast. What did you say, boys? Get it? Fly for Flyboy?
Herbert! Oh, no. How did you find us?
Before I left for this trip, I made a vow to great-grandpappy Ernie that I would make sure you boys are being safe. And here I am.
Herbert, you dumbass. I asked how, not why. Tell me now or I'm calling the police.
Yesterday, I was granted my very first airplane as a prize for getting my pilot's license.
Herbert, you never got your pilot's license. You stole it from the airport. Besides, it seems like you just ruined your post-license gift.
Maybe so. But don't you boys worry. With my exceptional flying skills, the crew over at the airport will be happy to give me a new one. But now that I'm down here on the ground with you boys, I always felt tagging on while you fed his backpack.
Herbert looked absolutely ridiculous. He wore a buttoned-up brown leather jacket that had a wing pilot's patch on it with a turtleneck collar. He wore a pair of pilot boots on his feet and short corduroy shorts with the knee-high socks. It seemed as if he had gained a ton of weight over the spring, too, as his potbelly was way too apparent, as was his triple chin. This accentuated his pear-shaped body tenfold. His black hair was slicked back 80s style, with maximum levels of grease present, and he had a small ponytail in the back, where the rest of his hair curled back in sort of wing shape.
Looking fly, eh, fellas?
He inquired, on the fly. No, Herbert, you are not looking fly. We can't allow you to do that. You always just ruin our trips and get us in trouble. If you follow the trail back the way you left, you'll find the parking lot about 1 mile. There, you'll see Chad, and hopefully he can call someone to pick you up. If not, I'll be forced to call the police.
Chad's around too? Quite surprised. You know, Nick, I think I might have to take you up on your recommendation. If the plane all taken to the trees, I will be in need of a new one. Chad can give me a lift back to the airport so I can claim my reward. After all, what's the good in Flyboy if he can't even fly? But don't worry, I'll be back in the air soon, and will be able to continue my pursuit of you boys.
We let Herbert do him. He took off down the trail we hiked in on. We knew he wasn't actually going to be rewarded with a new plane, so we figured that he'd be now out of our hair for good. You think we should alert the authorities at least about the plane crash? Asked Colin.
Man, fuck that shit. Let's get hiking, G. Them crawfish be kicking in.
I agreed with Steve on this one. That plane was likely stolen by Herbert, and people were probably already out looking for it. Besides, we didn't want to stick around the scene if the searchers happened to come by, so we got hiking. The trail started off fairly tame that morning. The vibrant green from the towering maples and bushy larch trees, along with the sunny meadows, made it easy to take Herbert off of our minds. We began to feel relaxed quickly. The trail then emptied out onto an old logging road. We had barely gone a mile when Frank started getting tired.
Eek! Kenyon! Steve!
What the fuck is it, Buzzman?
I'm tired. I want to take a break.
Man, you always be slowing us down. I don't give a fuck that you're tired. You should have gotten in the crawfish grind this morning, G, like me, instead of eating those fucking cheese balls.
It's weird because Steve too partook in the consumption of the cheese balls. The three of us decided to ignore Frank, as he seemed to always be complaining about things. We glanced back a few hundred yards later, however, and noticed that Frank was no longer keeping up with us. Rather now, he was lying down on the dirty gravel. The thing that allowed us to notice him best from that far back was his potbelly sticking up high and fly into the air. We all reluctantly ran back to Frank's location. I gave him some Gatorade and a pack of Mike and Ike's, which seemed to get him up and moving again. We all decided to take a quick break and review what we should do for the day. We had over 14 miles until our next intended campsite. Frank did not like that fact, as we hadn't even gone 1 mile and it was already collapsing. We took out the big 5x5 map to examine our locations. We thoroughly inspected our route and saw that not only was it over 14 miles, but towards the second half of the hike went through a series of valleys, hollows, gorges, rivers, and traversed in between plateaus, causing us to have to climb up steep mountainsides.
Man, how about we do a shortcut?
Steve suggested as he pointed out to a random spot on the map. I don't think that'd be too good of an idea, Steve. Especially out in this wilderness. We could get lost. Steve dismissed Colin's warnings and then went on to explain how this shortcut was nothing short of genius. He said that it would more than slice our route in half, mileage-wise, and that it would empty us right out at our campsite. That's when I realized this route wasn't even a designated trail. According to the map, it cut directly through a bunch of meadows, rivers, and swamps, which Frank seemed to be excited about.
Yay! Swamps!
Swamps? Oh, fuck nah, fam. I ate them crawfish this morning. I need to use up some of this energy. I want to climb some mountains. How about this? Y'all take the sissy-ass swamp shortcut with Buzzman, and I'll go take another shortcut to get some real adventure in.
Oh, no you don't, Steve. It's bad enough that Chad's already separated from us at the parking lot. We don't need you going off on your own and getting into trouble also.
Man, who are you? My dad? Be the gang? I'm taking my own shortcut. Y'all can join me if you want.
Colin and I did kind of want to go with Steve, even though his other shortcut was even more sketchy than the first, as rather than a straight line, this one went in a big swervy motion, so as to hit every single valley, mountain, and hill that there was. We wanted to go with Steve so A, he wouldn't get lost, and B, we wanted more miles as well, but there was no way we could leave Frank by himself, and so that's who we stuck with. We watched as Steve marched up the logging road and disappeared over a hill in the distance. That now left Colin, myself, and Frank to follow the shortcut on our own, and so we set off. Right away, we were hit with a challenge. The forest is extremely dense and thick. We could barely see more than 10 feet in front of us. It's extremely disorienting, and Colin and I were wondering how we were going to stay in a straight line, let alone en route. Luckily, Frank had a trick up his sleeve.
You hear me, guys? I can Google this.
Frank said as he pulled out his phone, which is now at 10% battery. Frank, I don't know if there's cell service out here. Google Earth probably won't work, said Colin.
Yep, it's working for me.
Replied Frank, and sure enough, on Frank's phone, Google Earth was working, although the projection was really blurry and didn't even have GPS. Colin and I simply decided to stick to orienting ourselves using the physical paper map, which seemed to work way better than the Frank plan anyway. We continued walking and soon found ourselves in a clear forest meadow before entering a bog with lots of mud. Frank began rolling around like a pig at it, the mud likely causing his voice to go extra pipsqueak. Frank, you're gonna need to wash off in a creek tomorrow before getting in my car, I insisted. As Frank was having the time of his life rolling around in the soggy mud, Colin and I decided to take a quick water break. However, as we stood there sipping our waters, I noticed something in the ground that gave me shivers. Hey yo, Colin, come take a look at this. I let the sun shine down on it so we could get a closer look. They were footprints. Not just any footprints, but human footprints. The thing that disturbed us most, however, was the 3-inch long toenails extending from the ends of each toe. And yes, that means they were barefoot. And the feet looked chubby too. I snapped a photo of them for future investigation and reference before the three of us continued on our hike. Frank was now covered from head to toe in thick, gloopy mud. He looked like a swamp monster almost.
Let me get my jumbo suit. Keep these dirty tonight.
We We continued hiking. It was close to noon around now. The sun was shining at its brightest and the temperature soared to 86 degrees Fahrenheit. We were still trudging through the vast meadows and large tree groves. Frank had hit a wall. He said barely anything and was panting heavily, which was weird, as we hadn't hit a single hill in 3 miles. Normally, we'd stop to eat lunch around this time, which is exactly what Frank wanted to do, but Colin and I predicted that we'd be at our intended campsite within less than a mile at that point. Come on, Frank. We'll be at camp in about half a mile. Stick with it, I told him encouragingly. We forced Frank to keep on walking. Based on the look on his face, I could tell he was about to collapse to the ground like a beached whale again. But literally seconds later, we stumbled out of the dense wood bushes and onto a paved forest road. We were still in the middle of nowhere, obviously, according to our map. Our campsite that night would be located a quarter mile down that road, then a left turn back into the woods, down a steep hill where we'd camp by a flowing river. We were all glad that we were at least able to walk on a flat paved surface now, instead of mud and bushes. Even though the road was flat, it was also curvy, as we were along the edge of one of the many plateaus. We heard the faint sound of a car engine traveling down the road behind us, and so out of instinct, Colin and I moved to the side of the road to let the car pass. Come on, Frank, out of the road. Car's coming. Frank, too, then got out of the road. Car whipped around a corner behind us and pulled up next to us as we walked. It was a red convertible.
What's up, bros?
Chad? Exclaimed Colin, surprised. What are you doing out here?
You know, I got a little bored chilling at the parking lot. Besides, it sure was getting a little bruised spooky at night, so I decided to break out the whip, take an enjoyable pro ride through the mountains.
Chad explained.
Now, how about we cut the chit-chat, hop in the convertible, hit the town for some gains lunch at Bro Hop?
That sounds good to me. I'm starving. We were all hyped as we hopped in the convertible, and so it was. Bro Hop was in our future. By the time we drove out of the wilderness into the town of Clearfield, Pennsylvania, it was close to 2 in the afternoon. Frank had fallen asleep in the back seat. Frank, wake up. We're here. Replied Frank as he awoke with a jolt. Chad stepped out of the whip and pulled his shades off his forehead. He looked at the bro hop with a sense of glory in his eyes, all fabled, as if he was preparing himself for the meal of a lifetime. I don't get it. I don't know if it was just me, but it looked like he was even starting to tear up a bit. My expectations for this meal were quite low, since it's bro hop of all places. I've been to bro hop many times in the past, mostly on night adventures, and each time after making a promise to myself that I will never again eat at bro hop, time and time again, like always, I find myself at Bro Hop once more. I'm grateful for the meal nonetheless though. Colin had neutral feelings towards the meal, and Frank was ecstatic. We walked inside and had to wait around 15 minutes since it was a Saturday around lunchtime. Soon, a waiter came and showed us to a booth. Hello boys, my name is Mike and I'll be your server today. We all greeted him and next to his time to order. For drinks, I got an iced tea, Colin got a water, Frank got a Sprite, and Chad ordered a chocolate cookie dough swirl protein shake. And for food, I got the omelet platter, Colin got steak and potatoes, Chad got the cake batter muffins with the side of ice cream, and finally, Frank got the cheese-filled sausages, which from the outside looked disgusting. Our food came, and before taking a moment to soak it all in, we dug in. The taste was pretty good as usual, but afterwards I felt greasy and weighed down as always. I made a promise to myself to never eat at Bro Hop again. We all hopped back in the convertible, and Chad dropped us back off the road we were hiking on before he came.
Catch you later, bros.
Presumably headed back to the parking lot to wait out the rest of the trip. Well, that was a bit of an unexpected excursion, but worth it nonetheless, mentioned Colin. I agree. Now let's get to camp. Luckily, by now, all we had to do was make a left turn down the hill, and once we made it to the river, we would know we had made it to camp, and so that's what we did. The terrain on the hill was also very challenging, but in a different way. This time, rather than dense bushes and mud, it was open forest of hemlock, but with steep and rocky slopes. We were all taking our time carefully going down the hill. All was silent until Frank broke the silence. It was his wailing voice, followed by a twig snap. He was then sent tumbling in a free roll down the hill. It was weird though, as he screamed before he was sent tumbling.
Help me!
He squealed as he rolled farther down the hill, picking up more and more speed as he did so. Colin and I chased down the hill after Frank, but then we realized that we couldn't find him. Frank! I called.
You're here!
It took us a moment of looking around, but soon we saw Frank's 2 chubby hands clinging onto an exposed tree root. We inspected further and found Frank hanging on to dear life by the edge of a cliff. He kicked and squirmed and looked pretty scared. Colin and I were able to help him back up luckily. Frank, you really need to be more careful, said Colin.
Just going with the flow.
Okay, Let's just forget about it and move on. We did just that. We carefully finished making our way down the hill, and 5 minutes later, we had finally made it to our campsite for the night. Quite an inviting sight to see indeed. The campsite was beautiful. It was located along a tranquil river with towering poplars and hemlocks alongside it. The trail we were supposed to arrive via was parallel to the river, and we were between them. Frank set up his 2 jumbo-sized camp chairs and was out cold immediately. Even though I let Frank be, I wasn't really happy that he was sleeping at 4 in the afternoon, as that likely meant he'd be extra hyper that night and want to stay up late. Colin then set up his tent, and I set up my hammock. We still had a lot of daylight left at this time of year, and so there's ample time to relax. Colin decided to relax in his camp chair by the empty fire ring, and I decided to cool off and go for a swim in the river, which felt extremely refreshing after a long day of walking. The ironic part about our hiking route that day was that we probably used more energy doing Frank's shortcut than if we had just stuck it out and done the actual intended route. This got me thinking back to Steve and how he was doing his own shortcut away from us, and I wondered how he was. I got out of the river and dried off. It was around 5 in the evening now, and Colin and I went into the woods to gather some firewood. We didn't need much, as we intended to sleep way earlier that night than the previous, since we were all worn out from what adversaries the day brought about. Little did we know, however, the events that were to occur that night would be on a whole new level of crazy. We gathered our wood for the campfire that night and lit it up. Frank was still snoring away, even though dinner time was approaching. Honestly, I was starting to become worried about Steve, as he still hadn't arrived. I pulled out Snapchat and tried to call him. The phone barely rang for even a second, as it immediately declined. 5 seconds later, and Steve texted me.
Can't talk now, G. Almost there.
Steve didn't keep his snap map turned on, so he couldn't actually see how close he meant. It was weird how he couldn't call them, as there should have been no reason not to pick up the phone when you're by yourself in the middle of the wilderness. I just had to trust that he would make it to camp. The sun was beginning to set now, and we were all getting pretty hungry for dinner. Colin and I went down to the creek to fill up our pots of water for cooking. The sun reflected off the water downstream, and so to keep our vision good, we forced our gaze upstream. Hey, did you see that? I asked Colin. See what? I didn't see anything. I saw something move in the bushes over there just upstream. And probably just a deer or something. Nothing we have to worry about, Colin said as he brushed off my concern. I knew though that my concern was valid. I wasn't going to bring it up to Colin again, but that movement I saw was one of a human, not an animal. I witnessed 2 legs and a chubby physique tramping through the woods, all for a split second. This is unnerving to me, as we were staying at the only campsite for miles, hundreds of miles from civilization. I brushed it off as maybe a hunter, or more likely perhaps a forest ranger. I decided to forget about it and enjoy the rest of the evening. Huge mistake. By the time Colin and I had finished boiling our water for our freeze-dried meals, Frank had awoken from his slumber.
Look, Frankie, can you have cheese balls with extra nachos?
Yes, Frank, you can do that. Frank then proceeded to dig around in his trash contractor bag and pull out a bit of cheese balls. He then pulled out a pack of instant nachos. He then dug in. Colin and I's meals took upwards of 5 minutes to cook, but once they were finished, they indeed tasted good. We all enjoyed our meal, chatted, and listened to the sound of the evening birds chirping. I don't know how, but it seemed as if we had dozed off during dinner due to the food coma, because I checked the time and it had been over an hour. It was all the way dark outside now, and the sounds of the night forest took over our ears. I'm talking owls, crickets, and katydids alike. Ayo guys, wake up! I think we dozed off, I exclaimed. We all woke with a jolt. The next few moments were filled with our flashlights turning on, along with Frank's wails. After we had calmed down from the surprise wake-up, Colin and I rekindled the campfire to provide some more light. My phone time right around 9 in the evening. We decided to stay up and chat for another 30 or so minutes before retreating to bed to get some sleep. We were in the middle of a conversation about prom when something spooky happened.
I'm thinking about asking my neighbor at the prom.
Frank, you really shouldn't be doing that. You know she's in her 30s, said Colin. If I was in your situation, then I had to cut Colin off. Shh, I whispered. Listen. We all listened intently and heard it. Aside from the crackling of the campfire, we heard the faint sound of twigs breaking and leaves crunching from far off in the woods. It sounded like they were getting closer.
Yay! Steve's here!
Exclaimed Frank. You think that's Steve? Colin asked me. I listened blankly for a moment. Steve! I called into the woods, hoping to get a response of,
Yeah, G?
Or something. Maybe even the sight of a distant flashlight, but no, rather, the footsteps stopped. The 3 of us just sat there, wide-eyed. We didn't say a word. Perhaps we were waiting for there to be another sound, but there wasn't. I think deep down we were all hoping to hear another sound, as the silence aside from the campfire crackling was getting unbearable. Even the crack of a spark was enough to make us nearly jump out of our seats. None of us bothered discussing the sounds we heard in the woods. We assumed that at worst it was just an animal or even someone like Steve playing a prank on us. The whole campsite was then mysteriously overcome with an unexplainable vibe of creepy. Hey, I'm getting pretty creeped out, said Colin. I'm gonna just call it a night. Frank added. I will admit that I wasn't too happy about Colin leaving me out here all by myself, as I wasn't tired yet. But then I remembered. Frank sleeps out by the fire ring in his 2 jumbo-sized camp chairs, so at least I'd have him to keep me company, whilst I let the fire dim down a bit. Anyway, Colin went and retreated back to his tent, which is only a bit off in the woods. Frank fell asleep right on cue, leaving only me awake. I simply sat there by the campfire, watching as the flames danced their now dimming orange glow. Next thing I knew, my eyes were becoming heavy, and I too fell asleep. But not for long. I suddenly awoke with a jolt. I did not know what it was that woke me up, but it had to be something. It felt like I was being watched, as if someone else was hiding in the darkness, creeping on me. Frank was still out cold with his head conked back, and Colin was still in his tent. In fact, I could see the dim light from Colin's headlamp as he read a book or something to wind down before bed. As far as I knew, Steve was still hiking to camp using his tough man's route. I looked down at my phone. It was around 10:30 p.m. I'd been asleep for nearly an hour. I looked up from my phone and towards the campfire/trees. That's when I saw it. The dim illumination of a chubby figure standing in the tree line around our camp. It stood just barely on the line of where the firelight would reach. I squinted my eyes a little harder, and then I was able to see exactly who it was. It was no one other than Herbert Ernie himself. I could tell because the faint light from the campfire was just enough to pinpoint his every distinguishable feature. His potbelly glowed in the light. His crazy hair glowed in the light. His triple chin glowed in the light. It was all very apparent. His crevices on his belly and triple chin were shadowed, but it seemed as if the light from the campfire creeped up him in a way, if that makes sense. Even though nothing was behind him, he seemed to be leaning back. The parts of his face and triple chin illuminated from the glow were waxy looking upon eyesight, and his eyes looked like they were made of glass. He stood the most still I'd ever seen a thing be. Even the tree trunks weren't as still as him. He looked like one of those wax figures you sometimes find in museums. Herbert simply stood there, doing nothing. I was so scared to even move a finger. Something told me that he hadn't yet noticed me, even though his beady eyes were staring directly at me. Though I had to do something, as the dim light from the campfire made the situation even more tense. Soon, I came up with a plan. The plan was to pretend that I didn't notice him. Got out my phone and texted Colin. Here's our conversation. Hey yo, code red, code red. Herbert's here. Wait, really? What's he doing? He's just standing at the edge of our campsite, doing nothing. Okay, let me pack up my things. We can't stay here. I agree. Oh, and since you're off in the woods near my hammock, do you mind packing that up for me as well? I'm afraid if I move, Herbert's gonna try and pull something dumb. I listened into the woods and was able to hear the faint sound of Colin packing up his items. Herbert caught on because for the first time ever, he moved. His chubby physique faded out of the light of the campfire and sounded as if he was moving towards Colin's tent. I then heard Colin scream from off in his tent. I turned on my flashlight and ran to see what was going on. I ran to find that Colin had luckily already finished packing up both his tent and my gear. Colin was standing by a tree, looking traumatized, and I then saw why. On the muddy ground sat Herbert Ernie breakdancing. He was pulling moves I didn't even know were possible. One of those moves involved him bending his head back down his back, then up between his legs.
How do you like me now, boys?
He said snarkishly. He then stood up. Colin and I both shined our flashlights on Herbert, who was now standing right in front of our faces. His 80s style greaser hair was looking greasier than ever, and his face had a look of maximum crazy. He smelled insanely musty too, like a mixture of grease and cheese. Herbert, how did you track us down? I demanded.
See, boys, during pilot training school, I was taught as one of the finest flyboys in town. Always keep track of your mates.
What? Colin responded, confused. He then looked down at his ankle. What the? Attached to Colin's ankle was a miniature tracker. I couldn't believe Colin hadn't noticed it by now. I had no idea how in the world Herbert even installed it in the first place. Colin immediately tried to take off the tracker, but to no avail, as it was glued onto him with a mixture of Gorilla Glue and belly button wax. Herbert, you better get this tracker off me.
Get it! And now that I get you boys right where I want you, I'm gonna show you the trick to the trade of the pilot's man's business.
Herbert announced dramatically as he began unbuttoning his fly. This is bad. We knew Herbert was always bad news from the jump, but never in our lives did we think that it would come down to this. Come on, Colin. We have to wake up Frank and get our asses out of here now, I said, panicked. I agree. Let's go. We grabbed what we could of our gear and ran back to the fire ring to wake up Frank. Come on, Frank. Wake up, wake up, wake up. Herbert's here, Colin and I exclaimed as we shook Frank awake from his slumbered state of being. After helping him up from his jumbo-sized camp chairs, he tossed all his gear into his trash contractor bag, and the three of us hauled ass out of that campsite and into the woods. Frank obviously had trouble keeping up, but I think in that adrenaline-filled heat of the moment, he had just enough juice left in him to keep running. Emphasis on just enough. We ran some more. We didn't care where we were going. It just had to have one requirement, and that was to be inaccessible to Herbert. We had to make it so that either he couldn't find us, or that he couldn't get to us. Ideally, though, we had both. After running for what seemed like forever, we finally found something. Like an oasis in the Ernie Desert it was. A tree stand. Is the kind that hunters use during deer season. We didn't think twice. We just prepared ourselves to climb. All the tree stand had to get up was an old flimsy rope ladder. We all struggled climbing it, especially in the dark. But once we were up, we huddled on the platform. It was super cramped up there, especially with Frank being with us, as the tree stand was only about 3 square feet. Once we got settled and began to slightly calm down, we realized that Herbert was far behind us. We had left him in the dust. Frank was a bit confused and, frankly, quite upset.
I don't think it was very nice to run away from Herbert,
he said sadly. Frank, you do not understand the severity of the situation.
Why couldn't I sleep? Herbert is fine! Sleep buddies!
Frank replied. And of course, Frank would always say something as stupid as this. Frank, do you not understand the fact that Herbert Ernie is here to ruin the trip? We calmed ourselves down some more and began receiving a FaceTime call. It was from Steve. At first, we assumed that he had made it to camp at long last, but then remembered that Herbert was still likely lurking in the area. Well, we picked up the phone to try and warn him about Herbert. When we did so, however, he wasn't at the campsite or even in the woods. Rather, he appeared to be seated in a nice-looking car headed into town. He was in the Brovertible. Here's the exact conversation between us. Steve, where the fuck are you?
Man, I'm with Chad, G. Fuck this dumbass camping shit. I had Chad Man pick me up on the Forest Road, and now we headed into the Hampton Inn. After that, we go hit up a Wild Wings.
Wild Wings sounds like a fantastic plan to me, bro.
Chad, how did you find Steve?
Around 7 p.m., I was taking an evening cruise through the bush when I came across Steve, bro, walking along one of the mountain roads. I asked him if he was lost, but according to him, he was taking the extra long route for extra tough man gains.
Oh, so Steve got lost.
Man, I did not get lost. The terrain in the Cabana area is too fat and weak for me. I was just going some extra distance to make up for the lack of climbs.
But Steve, you said you knew your way around the wilderness perfectly.
Shut your bitch ass up, best friend. Everybody knows you're the biggest bitch in town. Stop trying to hide it.
So, what do you say, bros? Will you be joining us for some Wild Wings? Or will you continue your ventures in the great outdoors? What's it gonna be?
Well, I guess it wouldn't hurt to join you guys for a late night dinner.
Now my man's talking.
And it was set in 30 minutes sharp. Chad would be there to pick us up at the main parking lot in his Brovertible. From there, we'd go join him and Steve at Wild Wings in the town of Clearfield. After that, Chad would come and drop us back off at the wild area, where we'd hike back to camp for the rest of the night to get some sleep. We began preparing ourselves to hike back to the parking lot and climb down from the tree stand. We then heard the faint sound of wilderness coyotes howling off in the distance. This caused Frank to shit his pants. Oh, Frank, what the fuck did you do?
Yips, it's me, one rip.
I think you may have done more than let one rip, Frank. Why?
The werewolf scared me.
Frank. Anyway, let's forget about what just happened and focus on hauling ass to that parking lot. We got hot wings in our future. We accepted that some of our gear would be lost for good, as there was no way we were returning to that campsite. The items Colin and I scavenged were our hammock and tent, cookware, and the basics such as our phones, keys, wallets, knives, etc. Frank was able to grab all of his belongings as, he barely brought anything in the first place. We got ready to go and then realized we were at least 3 miles from the main parking lot, meaning we would have to haul ass to get back in time. Chad claimed that if we didn't make the cut, then him and Steve were off to Wild Wings without us. And just in case you're wondering why Chad wouldn't simply drive back on one of those forest roads up the hill, it's because he gets scared driving in the woods at night. This didn't make much sense, however, as even the main parking lot was in the middle of nowhere. We had no time to message Chad for a late night debate about driving in the woods though, as we had time to make. The three of us began speed walking up the steep hill and back onto the plateau. Frank obviously had trouble keeping up, but he was just barely clinging on to our set pace. Emphasis on barely. However, that speed walk was then transformed into a full-on sprint when Herbert Ernie ambushed us from behind a large tree. It was obviously dark out, so Herbert only appeared as nothing more than a shadowy silhouette. That was the only evidence we needed though, as we were out of there and fast. We didn't bother turning our flashlights on, as it would only draw more attention to our exact location, something that was crucial someone like Herbert does not find out about. We ran for what seemed like forever. My heart kept beating faster and faster as my legs felt as if they were about to disintegrate, but we had to keep on running. I can only imagine how Frank felt. He panted as we ran. The woods felt as if they were endless. We ran over countless creeks, jumped over countless logs, and across many forest meadows. Luckily, our way was illuminated by the dim brightness of the full moon, which eliminated the need for a flashlight. We continued running, all until we reached quite the familiar sight, the plane wreck. We were at the exact same campsite from our first night there. That was quite the relieving sight indeed, as it indicated that we were likely less than a mile away from the parking lot. However, in the panicked heat of the moment, we did not continue our dash to the parking lot. No, I don't know why, but instead, we ran right into the remains of the old bush plane. The plane was even more retro on the inside than it was on the out. There was an old stereo from the 70s on the shelf near the cockpit, and a bunch of piloting magazines that looked like something my dad would have been gifted to as a child. Vintage antique items. We even came across a book titled Ways of the Flyboy, published in everything. It even had a picture of Herbert on the front and is in all black and white. It even had a New York Times Bestsellers emblem on the front. What the fuck?
Ways of the Flyboy. A must read if I do say so myself. You know, you've always really had it rolling when it came to this backpacking trip. It was a great idea,
Herbert mentioned enthusiastically as he appeared out of nowhere in front of the doorframe of the wrecked plane. The moonlight cast a glow upon him which made his eyes look glossy in a way. Little crescent moons sat as his pupils. His greasy, slicked back hair shined bright in the light of the flower moon. "Run!" Khan exclaimed, and we did just that. We ran back into the woods and followed the trail until we finally reached the parking lot with an utmost of 1 minute to spare. "Come on, we have to find Chad and Steve. Herbert's onto us." I wasn't far from the truth either, as the three of us listened intently and heard the sound of a faint coming from farther down the trail. We ran farther into the parking lot. We were having trouble finding the convertible, however, and began to worry that Chad had left without us. We kept searching around and found that they hadn't yet left. We at least knew that Steve was near when we heard the sound of bass-boosted little crawfish blasting from the red convertible. We ran up to the car, tossed our gear into the back, and hopped in just in time for Herbert to emerge from the bushes, jumping onto the windshield of the car. "Chad, floor it!" Chad began backing out of the parking space. Herbert held on steady to the windshield. He screamed, crazier than ever before, as he frantically pounded on the glass. Chad used the windshield wipers, and next thing we knew, Herbert had flown off the windshield and landed in the sewage ditch on the side of the road. Hey yo, Chad, thanks for coming in clutch.
No problem, bro. Anything for the bros.
What the fuck was that, gang?
Asked Steve. Herbert followed us out of the woods.
We ain't gotta deal with that motherfucker no more. We had the wild wings. I'm finna get the spiciest wing sauce chug.
Well, that may be the case for you and Chad, but Frank, Nick, and I still have to go back into the woods to finish out the night camping.
Well, you know, you bros can just finish off the adventure with a stay at the Hampton Inn at Clearfield. You've earned it.
You know, Colin, that doesn't sound like too bad of an idea. Why go back into those mosquito-infested woods with Herbert when we could chill at the hotel, take a midnight swim in the pool, and get a great night's rest in some real beds? Besides, we'll get the free hotel breakfast with the waffle makers and all in the morning, I told Colin convincingly. Believe me, neither Colin nor Frank needed much of any convincing. After what we had just gone through that evening, winding down at a nice hotel was exactly what we needed. It was also scheduled to rain early the next morning, and we didn't necessarily feel like packing up in the rain either. And so it was set. We had accompanied Steve and Chad for a nice hearty dinner at Wild Wings, before retreating to the Hampton Inn at Clearfield for a much-needed night's rest. We continued our drive through the night, the full moon highlighting the countryside on each side of us in an eerie nightly glow. We were all chilling, whilst listening to some music. 10 minutes later, and we made it into the town of Clearfield, Pennsylvania, and were pulling into the Wild Wings parking lot. Since it was around midnight now, we were the only people inside. A server greeted us at the waiting area. "Evening, boys. How many?" We told him for 5, and we were taken to a round table with stools. "Hello, boys. My name is Chris, and I'll be y'all's server tonight. Let's start with some drinks, shall we?" We all ordered our drinks. I got chocolate milk, Colin, lemon water. Chad got a house-style chocolate milkshake. Steve got a Mr. Pibb, and Frank requested a mellow yellow soda. Next was time for food. I got the medium hot wings with the side of mashed potatoes. Colin got the barbecue hamburger sliders with fries. Chad got the mild boneless wings with mac and cheese.
This dude ready to get them bonus wings.
Steve went on to get a tray of the Inferno wings with a side of their specialty Sexy Man's hot sauce. "Steve, that's going to be way too hot for you to handle." Colin warned.
Man, I can handle all the spice. It ain't shit.
Steve replied, flexing his non-existent bicep. Chad beat him to it, however.
I insist, Steve bro. This is what a true bicep looks like.
And finally, as always, Frank got the hot dog wiener rope, which looked absolutely disgusting. We all got our food, took a moment of silence, and dug in.
Whoa, man, these bitches be hard as fuck.
Cried Steve as he fanned his mouth using his hand. I told you those would be too hot, Colin mentioned.
Nah, G, it's just the shock of it, that's all. After days of toughing it out in the woods, eating moose and bugs, this spiced a little shot to my system.
We continued eating. Frank was beginning to go a little too crazy with that wiener rope. Yo, Frank, chill, I said. He exclaimed. We continued eating. The food is all pretty good. Chad really seemed to be enjoying his milkshake. However, as all our faces were focused in on our meals, we noticed that the warm and welcoming lights in the restaurant were now blocked out by a mysterious shadow. We glanced up and noticed the ceiling fan rotating slowly above us. Hanging from that ceiling fan was no one other than Herbert Ernie himself. He was attached to the fan via dental floss and was getting ready to drop down on us at any moment. A cheesy grin sat on his face as he slowly spun above. We sprang up from our seats and leaped back from the table just in time for the dental floss to give way and for Herbert to come crashing down to the table. He landed with a thud right into our food. He proceeded to roll around on our food for a few minutes before getting back up and taking 2 of Frank's hot dog wieners and sticking them into his ears. He now had 2 weenies, indeed, sticking out of his ears. Herbert, what the fuck are you doing here? I thought we abandoned you in the woods.
I sensed you boys were in trouble. You see, this establishment is anti-Flyboy. They claim that they have the wild wings, when in reality, it is me, Flyboy Ernie, that has true wild wings.
We all looked back and took a glance at Herbert and noticed that the grease from his slicked back 80s style hair was now in the process of dripping onto his leather jacket. He then did something that was previously thought to be unimaginable. He pressed his hands onto the 2 weenies in his ears and shoved them inside his head. They then came back out through his nostrils. Next, we witnessed Herbert press one finger over his right nostril and get ready to exhale as if he was blowing his nose. This caused one of the wieners to shoot out of his nostril at an extremely high velocity as it was heading right for us. We turned around to run, but it was too late as the wiener went right between Frank's ass cheeks.
Woo!
Now that's what I call fly doggy style. Win-win for the Ernie Glizzy.
Oh, fuck that, fam. I never signed up for this shit.
I had to 100% agree. Okay, Herbert, that's it. You've taken things too far this time. I'm calling the cops, Colin stated. I'm already on it, our waiter Chris said, who had witnessed the whole situation unravel. Come on, guys. Let's go to the hotel. I'm done with this meal and my appetite's ruined, I said.
Sounds like a good plan to me, bros. I think a nice evening dip at the hotel heated pool. It's just what we need to unwind after dinner,
said Chad, sounding slightly traumatized from what had just happened. I don't blame him.
Hotel.
Herbert said inquisitively. No, Herbert. The cops are on their way. You're gonna go to juvie for a long time for what you've done. But Herbert did not seem fazed by what Colin said.
Chad, if you don't drive me back to the hotel with you boys this instant, then I'll be forced to give you boys the glizzy treatment. Flyboy style, of course.
Piped Herbert, referring to the wiener still in his right nostril, ready to be flung out at a moment's notice.
You wouldn't want to do that now for me, bros,
Chad said, putting his hands up in defense, as if he was surrendering to Herbert. Next thing we knew, we were all making a mad dash to Chad's proverbial. I couldn't believe it. He was letting Herbert win, but Herbert would not win, however. I had a plan that I wouldn't execute until we arrived at the Hampton Inn. We piled in the convertible. Steve claimed shotgun, and Chad was driving. Colin, Frank, and I sat in the back, and Herbert laid across our laps. This made it extremely cramped back there, as Herbert's belly extended out to the size of your average refrigerator. We got onto the main road towards the hotel. That's when we noticed police sirens behind us.
Sounds like a better pull over, bros.
Oh, no, you don't. Remember the glizzy?
Weenie still aimed at Chad. Chad obeyed Herbert and kept on driving. Luckily, we were turning into the hotel at the exact moment. I was fully expecting the police to follow us into the parking lot and arrest Herbert, but unfortunately no. They kept on driving down the road. Guess they're after someone speeding or whatnot, rather than Herbert. I guess I'd have to execute my plan after all. That plan was to sprint inside the hotel, check in, and get our room as fast as we could, as it was imperative that Herbert must not find out our room number. Chad pulled into a parking space, and we all did just that. I had to shove Herbert out of the way in order to get out of the whip. After we exited, we ran inside. Herbert took some extra time to get out due to his unreasonable chubby weight. Hey, come on, we need a room now. Come on, it's an emergency, I exclaimed. Hey, you boys need to calm down, the front desk woman said. It was clear that they were not in the mood for any foolishness, especially at not nearly 1 in the morning. But this wasn't foolishness. This was serious. Please, I beg you, just read off the room number that you're gonna give us, please. Okay, fine, you'll be staying in room number 2221. Just as she said this, though, Herbert Ernie happened to be in the process of slinking his moldy-ass potbelly in through the sliding doors. He heard everything the front desk woman said.
Second floor, Sam Stanley. That way I would have some elevation so I can practice my fly skills tonight.
Run! We ran all the way up the hotel stairs, through the second story, and down the hallway. We used our room key and made it inside the room in just enough time for Herbert to round the corner. I hoped he hadn't seen us. We locked the door tightly behind us, and all sounded quiet from out in the hall. Whew, man, we all exclaimed, taking a much-needed sigh of relief. Bro, I am tired.
What do you mean, tired, G? The night just be getting started.
That's right, bro. We still need to partake in our late-night pool swim.
Oh yeah, almost forgot about that. Let's go. We were all hyped. A nice indoor heated pool sounded fantastic after being out in the woods for days. We all took turns in the bathroom changing into our swim trunks.
Ready for the pool, bros?
We're ready, but are you? You're still wearing your jeans and your football Letterman jacket.
Oh, you see, bros, I'm not exactly in proper swimming condition as of right now. Doc recommends waiting at least 1 hour after eating before you swim, and that Wild Wings isn't exactly water-friendly. So for maximum gains tonight, I think I'll just have to sit this one out. But don't worry, I'll come down to the pool with y'all. I'll relax in a recliner chair instead.
Heh, what a bitch you need. You should have gotten the wings at me. That's how you really get the gains.
Piped Steve, flexing his scrawny physique once more. That's enough, Steve. We all finished getting ready for the pool and exited our room. Our anxiety levels were through the roof on our way down the elevator, as Herbert could be anywhere. Luckily, he was nowhere to be found. We made it to the lobby and went inside the pool room. At this time of night, we were the only ones who were swimming. Steve, Colin, and I all jumped in immediately. After that, Frank did his cannonball, and we all braced ourselves for impact. Whee! Exclaimed Frank as he jumped.
First man, your fat ass always be making the biggest splashes.
I decided against telling Steve about Frank shitting his pants earlier, as not only would Frank be embarrassed, but I also knew that Steve was ruthless when it came to Frank in situations such as those. Chad reclined back in his pool chair and we all got to swimming. We were having a lot of fun, to be honest. We soon decided to play a sort of game where one person would play as the shark and the other people would be the ducks. Frank would be the shark first. Could only imagine how this would go. We got playing. Frank immediately submerged himself underneath the water and began slithering along the pool floor, like a snake rather than a shark. It wasn't really much fun though playing with Frank as the shark, to be honest, as he was really only going after Steve.
Get your ass off me, best man!
Steve exclaimed as he backed away from the approaching Frank. Frank soon cornered him, however, and before we knew it, Steve was being dragged underwater by Frank. Frank then resurfaced from the water, victorious.
Hey, win, Steve! Yo, buzzy ass was cheap as always. Besides, this fucking pool be too tight for someone of my size,
said Steve, yet again, flexing his scrawny-ass physique.
Seems like Steve, bro, isn't quite yet adapted to the watery environment,
Chad piped in from his relaxing pool chair.
Would that be a hot take, Mr. Tough Man?
Steve, bro? What are you doing?
Yo, Steve, chill. Steve was now climbing out of the pool and making a beeline directly towards Chad's relaxing pool chair. I had no idea what Steve's intentions were. Chad stood up and tried to run away, but in the process of doing so, slipped and fell directly into the pool.
Oh no, bros! My perfect swoosh! Oh no!
The pool water had messed up Chad's perfect blonde swoosh on the front of his hair. I also saw something else dripping down near his eyes.
Hey, this dude really wearing fucking makeup?
Seems like Chad is even more of a pussy than I first thought.
It's not makeup. It's actually called Bro Cup. The purpose of it is so as bros can get the gains, even in the face.
Oh, I saw right through this bullshit though, and recognized his bro cup, quote unquote, to be mascara.
Well, bros, since I'm already wet and such, I may as well go chill in the jacuzzi.
Chad did just that. We left him alone as he appeared to be a little upset looking from his embarrassment. The rest of us continued swimming and decided to simply let Chad be. 10 minutes later, and we're all in the middle of seeing who can make the biggest wave with their hands, when we heard an ear-piercing "Yoo!" come from the jacuzzi. Chad! What's going on? Chad sprang up from the jacuzzi and stood up. He was now pointing to one of the jets that supplied the jacuzzi with its bubbling water. We went over to take a look. What we saw shocked us to our core, as water was no longer the substance coming out of that jet. No. Rather, it was a wiener. It was the same one from Frank's meal at Wild Wings. It was being rapidly shoved in and out from the jet, and whoever was doing this was on the other side of said jet, as we had no idea who the culprit was. We then heard a muffled and gurgly voice echoing down from behind the jet. It spoke very triumphantly.
Get hit with Ernie Gizzy.
I couldn't believe it. Colin and I immediately took massive action and matters into our own hands, quite frankly. We went to one of those poolside drain lids that have water from the pool filtering underneath, lifted it up, and were greeted with an underwater version of Herbert Ernie. Quickly upon seeing us, he shot up, poking his head through the drain. He now wore a pair of frosted swim goggles as to see underwater. His triple chin rested upon the edges of the drain, so you couldn't even see the drain anymore. It looked like his head was part of the floor.
Evening, Burris. Enjoy the show?
Herbert, what are you doing down there? Herbert didn't respond, though. Instead, he began rotating only his head in a 360-degree motion. He looked like an owl. The sight scarred us all so much that we all jumped, hid in the jacuzzi, out of sight. That was a huge mistake, though, because Herbert then let rip the biggest fart of all mankind. At first, we didn't think of this as a big deal as we were all laughing about it. Our whole demeanor changed, though, when all of a sudden the bubbles coming out of the jacuzzi turned brown. Next, the smell of literal shit encompassed the water and air around us. We all had enough. We quickly jumped out of the jacuzzi and sprinted out of the pool.
I'll meet you boys in the room later.
We ran down the hallway and back up the stairs into our room, yet again locking the doors behind us. None of us said much as we took turns showering, getting ready for bed. It was past 3 a.m. at this point, and we were all tired beyond belief. We had to take precaution, though. Guys, we can't just go to sleep undefended like this. One of us needs to stay on watch guard for the remainder of the night, just in case Herbert comes. No way, Nick, replied Colin. We're all way too tired to do that. It'd be so boring anyway. How about we set up one of our phones and prop it up so it faces the door instead? Or press record on the camera before we go to sleep. That way if anything happens with Herbert and all, we'll have video proof to show the police.
Sounds like a straight plan to me, G.
We did just that. We all took turns changing into dry clothes before getting ready for bed. The arrangement would be that Steve and Frank would share a queen bed. Chad would have the other queen bed all to himself. I would sleep on the pull-out couch, and Colin, unfortunately, would get the short end of the stick and be forced to lug out the bulky World War I-style cot from the closet. The only place in the hotel room where the cot would fit was the little hall area right next to the door. We used Frank's phone to record the room for the nightly watch footage. It was around 4 a.m. now, and we intended to wake up around 7. So that was a good 3 hours of solid footage. I'm pretty sure we all fell asleep instantly, as we were the most exhausted we had been in our entire lives. I'm assuming nothing happened in the middle of the night, as I woke up not once. But little did I know how wrong we were. Around 7, our alarms and phones all went off, except for Frank and Chad's. They preferred to sleep in a bit later. Colin, Steve, and I decided on a plan that involved checking the footage from last night before eating breakfast in the hotel lobby.
Man, let's see.
Steve said eagerly as we opened up Frank's phone. Frank is still, to this day, the only person I know who doesn't have a passcode on their phone, meaning anyone can access it. The first hour of the footage went by uneventful, luckily, but around 5 a.m., though, we came across something that shocked us all. We fast-forwarded the video and stopped it right where we saw movement. The movement was not any of us, but rather the door of our hotel room creaking open. Frank's phone camera had night vision on it, so this helped us see the situation unfold. Anyway, the door creaked open and the light from the hallway shined in the room, illuminating Colin, who had his head closest to the door. We saw the shadowy figure of Herbert Ernie creep in the room. He proceeded to slither along the walls like a 2D figure. He traveled over Colin's cot, in and out of the bathroom and the closet, over Chad's bed, and over Steve and Frank's bed. He finally made it to the camera. It was weird though, as he stopped in a way as if he knew where the phone was. Herbert stood up and turned, his backside facing us. The night vision on Frank's phone was shit, so the only thing we could see was Herbert. Everything else around him was shrouded in darkness. Herbert no longer wore the 80s pilot outfit. Rather, he now wore a black hoodie and oversized basketball shorts. What we witnessed next, though, was a sight that would forever be implanted in our brains. Herbert proceeded to bend over, pull down the oversized basketball shorts, revealing his ass. I'm talking hairy butthole and everything. His chubby cheeks took up almost 90% of the screen and slowly waved in a back and forth motion. His butthole wasn't any further than 3 inches from the screen.
Oh, fuck nah!
Shouted Steve.
Fuck nah!
We all dropped the phone in surprise and disgust. We were at a loss of words, to say the least. Herbert was nuts. After we took some time to regain our composure and handle the situation properly, Steve took action. He was no longer scarred for life by what we had just witnessed. Rather, he found it funny.
I gotta show this shit to Buzzman.
Steve walked back over to the phone and picked it up. You would have thought that after 7 minutes, Herbert would have gotten bored and quit showing his ass to the camera, but no. Even after 10 minutes, he was still steady going. Steve took the phone and woke up Frank. Look, it's Herbert, was the first thing Frank said as he woke, pointing at the screen. Frank was still in a state of semi-sleep, if that's what you want to call it. His eyes were open, kind of, and he could talk, but I somehow knew that he was still asleep. So anyway, Frank took the phone from Steve. Out of curiosity, we all went around the other side of the bed to see what Frank was doing. As right now, he was just sitting there, watching the clip of Herbert shaking his ass. He then left the camera app and proceeded to open Instagram. Frank, what are you doing? Colin said precautiously. Frank then proceeded to go to the plus button at the bottom of the Instagram page, where he'd go to make a new post. He then proceeded to upload the footage of Herbert's ass from last night onto his page. Frank, stop! I shouted, but it was too late. He had already pressed the post button. I then got a notification on my phone that read, Frank Warming 69 posted for the first time in a while. I opened it and saw Herbert's ass right on Frank's Instagram page, with the bad quality night vision and everything. He had the location set for Clearfield, Pennsylvania, and had precisely captioned it, "Late nights with the boys." I tossed my phone across the hotel room in disgust. Luckily, it was okay. If you go onto my exclusive content page, you can find a picture of exactly what it looked like. I couldn't believe Frank would do something like this. I turned to give him a piece of my mind, but he had already curled back up in his blankets and fallen asleep.
Man, fuck this bullshit. Let's hit the breakfast bar in the lobby and get this shit out of our minds. I'm starving.
I had to agree with Steve on this one, as he was right. We needed to move on past the trauma between the cheeks. Besides, some strawberry waffles with extra syrup was just what we needed to recover from the trip. We'd go and eat breakfast before making our way on home. Steve, Colin, and I all made our way down to the hotel lobby to get our food. Even though it was morning around breakfast time, there still weren't too many people staying at the hotel, which is a good thing, as it meant shorter lines for the all-infamous waffle maker. We got in line and brought our food back to the table. We all kind of got a combination of everything from the bar. Steve's plate, however, consisted of mostly eggs, ham, and sausage. I tried a piece of Steve's ham. It was damp and watery, and so I stuck to my strawberry waffles, yogurt, and orange juice. Colin did the same. We continued eating, and 5 minutes later, Frank exited the elevator. He was here to join us. We didn't bring up what Frank had done on Instagram earlier, as we were just trying to do our best to forget about it. Frank went and got his food, which consisted purely of jelly beans.
Plip, when bean trip.
We were all enjoying our breakfast in peace, until the most disturbing thing in our entire lives came strolling out of the pool room. It was Herb and Ernie, and nothing more than tighty-whitey underwear. He immediately spotted us and said some words.
Sorry for the late notice, fellas. I came to your boys' room last night to practice my cha-cha fly skills. But I noticed you were all sound asleep, which is weird. I thought you would be all having a party. Anyway, let's get the insights and get straight to action.
The entire hotel lobby was in shock. Herbert then proceeded to do the unimaginable. He reached into his tighty-whities and pulled out Frank's hot dog. He then shoved it down his mouth and swallowed it whole, without even chewing. He then proceeded to undergo some sort of transformation. His arms and legs became tucked into his chubby center, making him like a ball. He then began to bounce up and down. At first it was slight, and only a few inches off the ground at most, but soon he was bouncing off the ceiling fan.
Well, boys, seems like Flyboy Ernie is getting a bit out of control, eh?
Herbert was now bouncing uncontrollably around the breakfast room. He was knocking over plates, tables, and even crashed into the waffle machine. This went on for a few minutes, and by the time Herbert had calmed down, the entire breakfast area was ruined. Breakfast canceled. I repeat, breakfast is canceled, the hotel chef announced. The cops were called, and 5 minutes later, Herbert was finally taken away. That meant no more Flyboy Ernie. By this point, we were all quite traumatized from what Herbert had done, and quite frankly, done with this trip and ready to go back home. And so that's what we did. We were all pretty silent the entire ride back. I dropped everyone off at their houses and went home myself. I sat in my room and just tried to prepare myself for another week in school. Well, at least summer vacation would be coming soon. Looking back on it, this entire backpacking trip was indeed a lot of fun, even if it was cut short by Herbert. And that, my friends, concludes the Pennsylvanian pilot's plot.